Hi everybody, this video will explain how to use Level Sequencer to create a cinematic within Unreal. So first off, I'm going to play my cinematic that I've already got created within this forest scene, and then we'll come back and talk about how to build it. So here's my level cinematic. Title it Intro Cinematic because it's meant to be played when the game mode starts, and then the gameplay will start after that. So let's let it play and we will watch what happens and listen to what happens. Alright, so now we're in play mode. I can interact with the game, move my character around, see what's going on. You see the tree fell down. I did a little bit of a trickery with level sequencing, or the level blueprint actually, to get the tree in there. So I'll talk about how I did that as well. But the idea is that the gameplay can start after the cinematic plays. I'm in unlit mode so I can see my world more. I'm going to open up the cinematic. We'll talk about some of the basic things. If you right click on a cinematic, you can choose Edit Cinematic. So the level sequencer is like a video editing tool. I have audio that will play. You can hear it scrubbing in the background. I have tracks of my cameras, bass audio. I have a tree mesh audio with that tree mesh that's playing a couple times, and then a post-processing volume. So you can add anything from Unreal, whether that is another sequence, cameras, objects, lights, particle systems, meshes, whatever else you might want to add into the level sequencer, and then create some animation, make it showcase what you like to showcase within the level. So this is meant to be a horror type game. So we have this horror introduction with some eerie music, some slow camera motion, some focus on some major areas, and then one final animation of a tree falling down to show the player needs to do something to get out of this space, or he's stuck in this space or whatnot. Within the level sequence, you can come in here and with the camera cuts track, I can hit lock camera viewport, so that way it will play it in the viewport. I'm going to turn on lit mode, and if I go back to the beginning and you hit spacebar, you can see the timeline and the level sequencer running, and now the cinematic is playing again. So it's a good way you can see it without having to go hit play mode and run through the whole play options. You can hit spacebar to stop it. You can hit spacebar again to play it again. So it's a really effective video editing tool. It's pretty simple, easy use of the tools. You can also scrub back and forth. When I go over here where the tree falls, I can scrub to there and hit spacebar. Watch the tree fall. If I want to scrub back, hit spacebar again. So this works very similar to other video editing tools that have keyframe based animation. Each one of these red circles is a keyframe for that particular track. So we can do fades in and out, like a fade to black. So it starts off black and it'll fade into visibility, then other areas it'll fade to black and back out. So every red dot is a keyframe. This is a camera actor, and this camera starts right here in its motion, and then as it animates, there's another keyframe later that saves that motion as well. So the cinematic is doing a very basic camera motion, some basic object motion, simple fades. I have a couple of audio tracks that's playing in the background. And I'm also adjusting the post-processing effect a little bit as I do some of this. Alright, let's go start from scratch. So the first thing I need to do, I have this level blueprint playing as the event begin play plays. So I'm just going to stop that from happening. So it's not going to play the level sequence. So I If I hit play now, it'll just go into play mode. So we can trigger a cinematic, or we can have it start from the beginning of the gameplay. So let's create a new cinematic here. I'm going to go into unlit mode again. And in the cinematics drop down, I'm going to do add level sequence. That's going to ask me where I want to save it to. I have a sequence folder, so SEQ for sequence. And then we'll just say intro cinematic 2. So no, this is going to be different from the one I've already created. You should go ahead and open up that level sequence. I'm going to close this out for a second. This does create a visual node in the viewport to let you know that this is already in the view as well. One thing we can do is turn on autoplay, which will mean as the game plays, it will go ahead and play that cinematic. If autoplay is not on, that means we need to trigger it in some way or tell it at some point to start playing that cinematic. Alright, so now we need to incorporate objects or things that are animating in that cinematic. So we're going to start by creating a couple of basic cameras. Actually, with this demo, I'm just going to show one camera, and then I'll come back and I'll show the more complex one with multiple cameras and break down how those are set up as well. We might actually do two cameras to show you camera cuts and fades, but I'm not going to go through the full cinematic that I created earlier. I'll go back and play that again. So over here on the left in the modes in cinematic section, there is 3 different kinds of cameras. For cinematics, we typically will use that sine camera actor, which is a cinematic camera actor. If I drag that into my world, it should show you a preview of what the camera sees. But here's what the camera looks like. Looks like an old 8mm camera or whatnot. If I move it around, you should see that it's changing what the camera looks like there. So let's just do some slightly different angles than what we did before. Maybe do really close to this fire. We'll do a little bit off center because we're going to use the film theory of the rule of thirds, where we don't place things directly in the center. So that's interesting. So we move it to one of the rule of thirds. Move it down a little bit. Have the trees in the background there. So with this first camera, we are also going to go ahead and just position it in the original position we want that camera to look at the scene. And then we're going to open up our intro to cinematic. Edit intro to cinematic 2. Move this down so that we can see both at the same time. Here's my new camera that I added. This should be camera actor 5. I also have some other cameras in here as well. To add an object to a level sequence cinematic, we have to have that object selected, and then in the level sequencer there's a plus track. We're going to add a new track, which is a new layer per se. And if I go plus track, add actor to sequence, and the top one, since it's selected, should say add sine camera actor. So through the length of the timeline, whatever that timeline is, as default that's from 0 to 150. Every 30 frames is 1 second, so that is 5 seconds here. So it will pull in the camera cuts tab as default and show me a preview of what that camera sees. So now I have my one camera. When I select that camera in the sequencer, it should also show me a preview. I can also click on the lock sine camera to select a viewport, and that will match my viewport to whatever this camera is. Okay. So that's one way we can do that. I like to just kind of see the preview because that'll still allow me to kind of move my camera around. So to create motion for this, we're going to use transform. We can animate anything else that the camera has, such as aperture, depth of field, focal distance, whatever else you might want to add. I'm just going to animate the transform just as a basic demo. So maybe we want to add a fade out of black, maybe half a second of fade out of black. We'll just start there. So I'm not going to start this camera motion until half a second in, and I'm going to click the transform key button. That's a little circular button right here. If I click that, a red key circle will become visible on that frame. To change the frame, you just click in the top area up here and drag that left and right. The left green bar is where the timeline will start. the right red bar is where the timeline will stop. So one of the things I'm going to do is, after I create the first keyframe, move around, let's see, I don't know, maybe 2 seconds down. And then maybe we will kind of slowly rotate or move the camera backward so we can see more of the scene. So I physically move the camera backward, and let's hit the transform button again. When that happens, you'll see a blue dotted line that shows you the motion of that camera or object, whatever is moving in the sequencer. If you scrub back and forth, you can see that camera moving back and forth in the preview, uploading it as well. So with this sequence, I've turned on autoplay. So if I hit play, it's going to go ahead and play that motion for me. It's going to stop there. And after that sequence is over, it's done playing the sequence, it's going to go into play mode. So now I'm back into play mode. So that's kind of the steps that I wanted it to do. I just want it to be a longer cinematic or level sequence. So I need to add more frames. Maybe that motion was too fast. So let's just put something up higher, 600. So on the bottom of the toolbar of the level sequencer, you can click on this little box right here and change it to whatever the end frame you want it to be. I'm going to drag the red bar, which is the last frame of the sequencer, all the way to the end over here. So we'll drag that to 600. And then the camera cut, this is what camera the sequencer is looking through at the time. Let's just do one that's 300 frames. And then now from that motion, maybe I'll move the start to around 30 frames, and we'll have this motion be much longer. Maybe to 240. There we go. We can hit save. That should update that sequence. The motion is the same, but now when I hit play, it's going to be a lot slower of a motion. I have the existing audio going on with the player character, the breathing, the birds going on, whatever else I might have in my scene here. So that's an easy way to add a camera. We'll go ahead and add another camera in here. Maybe we'll do something completely different, like a top-down view. Try to get that that fire in view. I'm going to do something completely different here. So we'll go for more of a zoomed out point of view. Really far away, maybe. There you go. We'll put this one maybe on the right side. Move it back a little further away. That'll work. Alright, so that's the original position. And then in my level sequencer, with that camera selected, I'm going to click the plus track again, actor to sequence, and add the second camera to my level sequence. Now once you add a second camera, it doesn't automatically add it to the camera cuts track. So what we need to do is go up to the top, move my timeline to the end of where my first camera should stop. And then let's go to the camera cuts and hit the plus beside the camera icon. Go to new bindings and add this camera actor 7 there. So that will change the camera at that time to a completely different camera. So let's, now that we have two cameras, let's hit the lock viewport to camera cuts track, and let's scrub back and forth. So there's our camera 1, it'll play, and then on this frame 300, it'll switch to camera 2. Okay. So now I can turn off that camera cut and create some motion here. So let's go to frame 300, and with actor 7, let's hit the keyframe button, and we're going to do a slow pan in, and then we'll kind of rotate sideways maybe. So camera actor 7, find where it is, there it is. Alright, so over that time, we're going to zoom in really close. We'll make sure it's still in view. It's pretty interesting. And then we'll come up and got my position, hit the transform button again. So put keyframes on that track. Each track can have its own keyframes. Maybe that'll pause for a little bit. So to pause, we just move the time and click the keyframe button again. So that motion's not going to change in between those. If I go back and look at it here, So it'll start from the top, it'll kind of pause, and then I want it to maybe rotate pretty quickly. Find my camera again. Rotate it, move it down. Maybe we have an extreme close-up. We're got the fire in the background, but we can see the trees and stuff behind it. Okay, whoop, actually we need to make sure when we reset this, it's going to pop back. So back on frame 600, now we're going to do it again. So we'll roll it down. We'll rotate it and move it down a little more. Try to get pretty close to that branch there. There we go. So now on this frame 600, we're going to click the keyframe button. And then now when I move to the camera cuts lock viewport, we should see it zoom in and then kind of rotate down to focus on the last frame. So it immediately cuts off. So what I'm going to do is actually just add maybe 660, so 2 more seconds to the end of that. I'm going to drag the red end timeline all the way to the end. That'll work. And then I need to drag the camera cut actor 7. Well, make sure we move. You can also drag it left and right and moves that camera cut someplace else. I just want the end of it. So I'm going to drag that all the way and snap it there as well. Alright, so now it'll end. We can watch it a little more. I'll kind of pause. I'll give some time to fade to black there. Alright, fades are pretty easy as well. Let's maximize our timeline. You can zoom in and out by selecting the bottom bar and dragging that. We'll make sure we're back on 660. We'll put the final frame 660 as well. So now we can start to add some fades. So fades are pretty easy as well. If we go to the plus symbol for track, we're going to do a fade track. And then I have the fade track right underneath the camera cuts. And as default, 0 means it's going to be completely visible. And then if I put in a value of 1, that means it's going to be completely faded to black. So look at this. 1's going to be black here. I need to go into lit mode so I can kind of see that. But 0 is going to be everything's visible. So I want it to be black to begin with. And we will click the key button beside fade to black. I'm going to move to, what would it do, 30 frames, and then we'll do a fade back to 0, so that will give us a kind of a preview of that in the sequencer as well. But if you drag back and forth, you can see that fade happening. With our camera cuts, we're also going to want to do some fades as well. So maybe from the point of the camera stopping here, we're going to fade to black, or keep it at 0 when the camera stops moving. When the next camera cut happens, we're going to fade to black as there. And then maybe a couple frames later, the camera is already moving, but we can fade back to 0. So kind of fade as that camera's moving. Then at the end here, it'll kind of move to this frame, maybe the last 30 frames. Click the key button for it to be invisible, and then 30 frames later, we're going to fade to black there. There you go. So now if I hit play back on the first frame over here, we can watch those fades, we can watch the camera cuts. So it's visible and it's about to start to fade after the camera stops. Fade to black, camera cut change, fade out of black. So fading is really nice between camera cuts if you don't want a sharp cut between two different camera positions. Fade to black, that should be it. Alright, so that's something that you can easily do with cinematics, is to add cameras using the camera cuts wherever you move the timeline and create a new camera cut. That's where it cuts between the different cameras, and then add a fade track. Alright, so that'll wrap it up for this video. We will come back in the next video and talk about how to add some more detail with the cinematic. So this one discussed how to set up a cinematic, how to create cameras and fades, and then how to also turn on the autoplay for it.